There we go. All right. Well, welcome to our next panel. We're going to talk about election denialism and security research. For those of you that have not seen me earlier, my name is Kendall Spencer. I am the attorney on the EAF board. I've been involved in DEF CON for just under 10 years now, and it is always a pleasure to be involved in this work. My legal work is a montage of tech transactions, contracting, a lot of privacy and cybersecurity research, and just a little bit of sports law. But you really don't want to hear too much from me. You want to hear from my lovely panelists. So what we're going to do, this is going to be really an interactive discussion. So I'm going to give everyone just a couple seconds to share a little bit about who they are, and then we're going to get right into some questions about this current ecosystem we're in when it comes to election security and research, and really what our responsibilities are as citizens here. So Michael Moore, why don't we start with you, and then we'll just move down the line.
I'm Michael Moore. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Arizona Secretary of State's Office and former ISO over at the Maricopa County Recorder's Office.
Philip Stark, currently unemployed, retired as of last month. Not sure what to say about myself. I was a professor of statistics at UC Berkeley. I served on Verified Voting's board of directors for a while. I'm on the board of EIF. I served on board of advisors for the Open Source Election Technology Institute. Was on the board of advisors of the EAC appointed by Nancy Pelosi. I don't know, stuff.
Hey, Jeff Hale. I'm a visiting fellow for election security at the Center for Democracy and Technology. Prior to that, I was Associate Director for Election Security and Resilience at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I think that's it.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for being a part of this discussion. Now, if you guys have been here all weekend, you've heard about vulnerabilities, internet voting, mobile voting, legal barriers to voting. Our village exists because finding problems makes our election systems stronger. But what we've seen over the past couple years is issues and individuals weaponizing some of the research to destroy, in some ways, public confidence. So I want to start asking our panelists here, in your opinion, what are some of the differences between discovering a vulnerability and then proving an election outcome was incorrect? Just broadly, and you can add in some of your prior experiences. We want to talk about the overall systems that we're dealing with.
I mean, part of it, I'm kind of a little stunned by the question, because it's like, aren't they obviously different? I mean, a vulnerability is not an exploit. You can leave the key under your doormat, and that doesn't mean that somebody takes the key and opens your door. I mean, they're just two different things. If you could eliminate the vulnerability, you may reduce the opportunity for tampering, or make things more difficult. But the fact that things are vulnerable doesn't mean that there's a problem. The political problem that I think this is generating is that there are people on both sides who kind of define themselves in terms of their opposition to people on the other side. And so we're finding ourselves in a situation where some people on one extreme are equating vulnerabilities with stolen elections, and people on the other side are denying that there are any vulnerabilities because because the other side says there are, that's somehow the defining characteristic. I have problems with both sides. I think that it's not that subtle a distinction to make, to say the systems are shit. That doesn't mean somebody's taken advantage of it, or that there's evidence that there is. I mean, maybe they have. I don't have evidence that they haven't, because we often run elections in such a way that we wouldn't be able to tell whether they were tampered with, because the systems and processes are so bad. But that's not the way things are universally. And in the other direction, the idea, the vulnerability deniers, I just deeply disbelieve that the way to convince people to trust the system is to lie to them about its trustworthiness. That just can't be right.
Jeff Hill, moving to you a bit, and feel free to follow up, but how do you think about this concept of vulnerabilities and capabilities versus actual observed activities?
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with Philip on the elements about vulnerability not being equivalent to an exploit. I do think that here we have a kind of unique audience for this, and even the conversation that we're having already is at a level that the general public does not have common understanding for. So all the work that security researchers are doing to identify vulnerabilities, there is a subsequent responsibility on how to communicate about them. That I think that's where the failing seems to be. And sometimes it's not communicating to the height of your technical ability. It's about dumbing it down and explaining it in the most simple process. I love the analogies that Philip can draw on keys and houses and evidence of actual break-ins or exploits. But the reality is the depth to which we're having the conversation about the vulnerabilities that are discovered and then seeding it to people who want to weaponize that for different purposes is where a lot of this conversation gets lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Go on,
So briefly add to that, security professionals in the room, perhaps also election security professionals in the room, please, for the love of God, talk to your representatives and your senators about cybersecurity, right? Like exactly to what Jeff is saying. A lot of what we've got right now is a communications problem. People that don't understand security concepts are commenting on security ideals inappropriately, right? And when I touch on my previous talk, weaponizing threat intelligence sharing is going to bite us in the butt big time, right? So getting them to be like, regardless of what side you're on, stop doing that. You're hurting everyone if you're getting people to think like, hey, if I share things, it's gonna be dangerous. One more thing to add on that is, I try to think of myself as a champion customer. When we're talking about vendors in this space, I have no qualms asking my vendors to be better, just like I want my customers, the county's voters, to ask me to be better, right? But do so in a respectful way. So when we find vulnerabilities, again, just that idea of like, don't attack people. It's not like you're stupid because there's SQL injection. Like, there's SQL injection, let's just fix it and move on from there.
Now, it's interesting the way you frame that, and I kind of want us to dissect that a bit further here. When, from your point of view, Michael, when the public hears the word vulnerability, what do you think it is that they actually hear?
They think bad, incompetence, negligence. They think you don't care what you're doing. They think, lazy government worker or vendors, et cetera, right? Like, in every walk of our life, literally everything you look at, there are vulnerabilities, right? There's a mechanism that if you had enough resources and training and dedication that you could exploit things, right? Regardless of what system you look at. So trying to get the general public to understand like risk and risk management, it's challenging, but it's something that we need to be thinking about.
There's an element that elections are kind of unique in that there's a sanctity to elections. You want to support democracy in this way. You hear about vulnerabilities in aviation. You hear about vulnerabilities that's your life and safety. And somehow the public can ingest that and process that differently than they do with vulnerabilities to elections. You understand that your plane may not be exploited simply because there's a vulnerability there. But when it comes to talking about voting systems, we don't seem to give it the same grace.
Yeah.
Well, no, not dissent, but just, a lot of it is the demonization of the other side, right? It's sort of like within the system, it's like there's an adversary, we should be taking adversarial posture with regard to election security and privacy, et cetera. But then kind of within our political system, things have become so intensely adversarial that, the people you're trying to protect the election from is somehow the other side. And if there's a vulnerability, the evil people must have taken advantage of it, right? Or converse, I don't know. It's just, this is a national security issue. It ought to be first and foremost protecting our country, and secondly, political divisions. Not first and foremost political divisions, and secondly, whatever.
It's a great point, and I think that gets a lot to this being, in part, a communications problem. And so let's maybe touch on that a bit here. How do we start to talk about this? This line between what journalists are reporting on, what researchers and practitioners are actually discovering, and then what policymakers are then going forward and doing. How do we start to have these conversations in a manner that doesn't obviously destroy public confidence, but also, to your point, Philip, doesn't demonize the other side and make this such a us versus them type of situation, and that's for all of you, obviously. Sorry. Okay.
So,
Voter ID would help. Let's.
so
We have to show voter ID to get free parking. We need to show ID to get free parking.
we can talk about particulars, but I'd rather at the moment talk about relationships and trust, across the aisle. This stuff really came to a head for me when I helped audit an election in New Hampshire in 2021. It was a state representative contest that had taken place in during the 2020 general election. Hari Hursty, who's one of the founders of Voting Village, and I and Mark Lindemann, who's with Verified Voting, were brought in to audit this election that had some mysterious results, and it was just full-on hostile. I got death threats. By the same token, the most useful person to me, the person that I most value having cultivated a relationship with while this was going on, was a One America News reporter. We developed trust for each other and respect for each other. She was interested in understanding what was really going on. I was interested in getting to the bottom of things, and she was a wonderful sounding board to be able to say, look, this is the technical problem we're trying to solve. Here are 3 ways that we might be able to solve this technical problem. What is your audience going to say about them? How do I do this in a way that is actually going to solve the problem and not just freak people out, piss people off, whatever it is? And that relationship has persisted. And anyway, I'm babbling now. So.
I think there's an element that's interesting. If you think of the strength of the individuals at this conference and the community as a whole, there's a power in the ability to translate what is technical. And we've seen tactics used to use technical complexity as a proxy for authority, as authoritative information. If you think of the cyber symposium that Mike Lindell ran, where there was hex data, and claimed that this showed that China was in every system. It took security researchers and cybersecurity professionals to say, I've looked at all the information here, and this is not what it claims to be. That's an important role, and really that communication side is essential with every vulnerability. Like, there's absolutely legitimate vulnerabilities that need to be discussed and need to be contextualized and need to be mitigated and remediated. Doing that in a way that communicates in a manner that the public can understand is essential going forward when you do have this adversarial element. I'd love to get past that, but I don't see the my side won, your side lost, somebody must have cheated, going away anytime soon. So how can communities who have authority based on their knowledge and experience be able to help?
So, one of the unfortunate aspects of the current political situation is that we now have disjoint sources of truth. That if something comes out of one person's mouth, it must be false because of who's saying it, not because of what you know about, not because of their expertise or what you know. And that's happening in both directions. Both sides are doing this. And building trust across, actually having real conversations with real human beings and figuring out what's going on, I think is the only way out of this. We've got to agree on some common facts at the end of the day, and that's going to come from human trust, and that's going to come from person-to-person stuff, not from things that are blasted out over social media, or whatever. So I really think, smelling each other's pheromones is important.
That's a wild example. I like it. Michael, what do you think?
Sure. So just very quickly, Arizona has voter ID and documented proof of citizenship for the past 20 years, but every state is different. And as a security professional, obviously I prefer not just identification, but also authentication when it comes to things that are important. But it's a complex, nuanced thing, and laws, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that I'll throw out there related to that is, you ever talk to and not to knock CIOs, but they've been on a flight and they read an advertisement and this is the product that they want to buy, right? There are folks that are having conversations in the space that are secure ballot paper, that's the answer, or secure drop boxes. We don't have infinite resources, so we need to make sure that when we're spending money on things, they're addressing real things that are problematic. We should do actual assessments of where is our greatest risk, do risk calculations and spend money accordingly, and greatly increase the funding to elections, please.
I'm going to try to be just even slightly, more concrete. You want voter ID, right? Okay. You want it presumably because you believe that there are people who are not legitimate voters who are casting ballots. You believe that that's happening at a noticeable rate that could be affecting the outcomes of elections. You might in addition believe that somebody is mobilizing large numbers of people to vote illegally. That's a separate issue from ensuring that the paper trail really contains only the ballots cast by legitimate voters and hasn't been adulterated either by votes cast by not legitimate voters, people stuffing ballot boxes in some other way. That's absolutely crucial for election integrity. We don't know who really won unless we have control of that. We may disagree about what's the best way to solve that problem or how big that problem is, but we can certainly agree that it's an issue that needs to be taken care of, right? So then we can talk about, okay, how big is that problem right now? What evidence do we have around that? What are some steps we can do to try to make things better? What are the other consequences of those steps? One side is very concerned that any demand for voter ID is going to disenfranchise people. The other side is very concerned that not having voter ID is erroneously enfranchising a bunch of people who shouldn't be enfranchised. So have a conversation about it, figure out what's going on, and figure out what steps are reasonable to take, right? I mean, but I'm not going to say, no, there's no problem, there's nothing to see here, there's a legitimate concern, right? So, I mean,
I feel like, Philip, on that point, so much of these types of communication issues has to do with, as you said, being able to agree on even just a handful of facts, right? So much of communication will often fall apart when there's just a, well, I believe the sky is blue, and I'm basing my arguments off of that belief structure, and well, I believe it's green, and therefore my answers follow that way. So getting to a point where we can agree on a handful of key facts, I think is paramount to moving this forward. Now, here's the twist. I got you in a second. We have enough time for questions, and I know Michael Moore didn't get any as well. So if you guys are comfortable, we're going to open it up to questions, and let's get the audience involved. You had mentioned something. You raised your hand, yes. And I'll try to repeat it because I know it might be.
I'll try to talk. Is that loud enough?
We'll find out.
Okay. So there is a source of truth in the paper ballot, right? That everyone produces a paper ballot of some sort or a paper record. They're almost impossible to audit. The times are very short. The litigant or the party, I think in most states, has to be one demanded. If something that's found later, there is no way to do it except through the courts. Trying to get through the courts is nearly impossible. So why don't we have, or do you guys know, or is there maybe a process, a way that there could be paper ballot audit checks done by overseen by maybe like the ACLU or a legal body of some sort? Because right now you can't get those done.
So to repeat did you guys hear the question okay?
I got part of it, but are you talking about auditing that makes sure that the paper itself is legitimate, or are you talking about auditing the outcomes using the paper record?
I'm talking about auditing outcomes, if there's some evidence, whether statistical or actual, that there might have been an algorithmic issue or there might have been a voting issue, to audit the paper ballots, which is almost impossible to do after the deadlines, and the deadlines all end in January.
So for those of you that didn't hear, her question involves,
Go first.
really quickly, for those that didn't hear, her question was about paper ballots and being able to audit them and it being next to nearly impossible. So that's where we're starting.
And if I talk after Philip, I'm going to sound real stupid. So let him sound better, right? So in Arizona, that's my expertise. Every election, there are hand count audits of statistically significant random samples. Pardon?
You're talking about RLAs?
They're hand count,
They do something.
Okay, but is it, just real quick before you.
and it occurs before the canvas.
Are there enough ballots to, like if they're under 300 or 400 or 1,000 ballots, they're not gonna, that's not an audit check.
It is a percent. I believe it may be 1% random sample. So not to the level that Philip's about to talk about, but it does occur to try and find any kind of irregularities. And it's performed by the political parties, not election officials.
So first and foremost, if the paper trail isn't trustworthy, the audit is not probative, nor is a recount. And so job number one for every election official in every place should be to make sure that they have a trustworthy paper trail of every validly cast vote. In some sense, it's less bad to lose votes than it is to have ballot box stuffing for technical reasons that it sounds like they're equally bad, but in one sense you have, anyway, never mind. There are, I think, is Barbara in the room? Verified Voting has a webpage about what audits are conducted in what states. There are a lot of states that do routine audits. Most states do not audit every contest after every election. I personally believe that once we've solved the trustworthy paper trail problem, and job number one is do that, because if you're not doing that, the audit is security theater. It's just a distraction from the more fundamental problem that your paper trail isn't trustworthy. It's a waste of money and time, in my opinion. That's an extreme view, but anyway. If you do have the trustworthy paper trail, there are ways of auditing to ensure that if error, malfeasance, whatever affected who was announced to be the winner, you have a high probability of catching it and correcting it before things become final. I agree there's a very compressed canvass period in a lot of states, and even in my state of California that has an extremely long canvass, like 28 or 30 days, audits end up being compressed because until the last 3 days, you're still giving voters the opportunity to cure signature problems on absentee ballots and things like that. So audits end up happening under time pressure. I think it's crucial that some auditing happen before elections are certified. This is measure twice, cut once, right? It's just get it right before you make it permanent, right? There have been audits that took place after certification. It's very difficult to deal with that. What if you find a problem that altered the outcome? What does the law say, et cetera? Really a big mess. But I completely agree. There ought to be routine audits of every contest after every election. In order to do that and have it actually be effective and probative, we need trustworthy paper, not just
Perfect.
any
Let's
paper.
wait. Hold on. I want to get to a couple others. You back there? Yeah.
To that end, I agree that trustworthy paper trail is necessary, and robust paper audits of all contests are necessary. But they're never going to be perfect. They're always going to be subject to human error, right? The paper trail will be compromised because it's a nice talk, right? Like, how do we live in some grace for election officials and communicate that with the public there? Maybe we're not perfectly meeting the bill of standard for it, but that doesn't mean there's no evidence that the election outcomes are right. It just means the evidence might be.
So the question for those that didn't hear it is a question of how do we address the lack of perfection in the audit system, essentially. Right. Yeah. All right.
So should I take that since I think it's addressed at my pointy head. But I know that we shouldn't have any tolerance for ballot box stuffing, right? Ballots can fall off a truck, but no ballot should fall on a truck ever, right? We actually have auditing methods that can account for lost ballots, misplaced ballots, unaccounted for ballots, and still give you a rigorous answer. We will never have a method that can compensate for the recording of votes on the paper itself being untrustworthy, and that's where we are with ballot marking devices right now. Putting technology between the voter and the paper record is a problem that I don't see a way around. But once you have enough votes cast, enough votes recorded using ballot marking devices, that if those votes were recorded incorrectly could change the outcome of a contest, we have a fundamental problem, and I'm just not going to say that it's okay. That doesn't mean that it's anybody's fault. I mean, on some level, it's the fault of that we haven't come up with a better technology for voters who have particular kinds of disabilities, whether it's visual or dexterity with paper, to be able to independently hand mark a paper ballot. So we need to accommodate all voters. We need to allow people to vote independently and privately. We don't necessarily need to put a touchscreen voting machine between every voter who votes in person and that voter and the paper record of that.
That's not what it is.
Yep.
So imagine that you don't have algorithms. You have exactly what paper trail.
Yep.
So you're still going to lose out. You're still going to have people.
Yeah. So we can deal with some loss of ballots and still have a rigorous audit.
Right, but if it's still broken, you don't have perfect chain of custody, right? How do you know?
Well, okay, so you don't have perfect chain of custody, but there are places that aren't even keeping track of the ballots at all, right? I mean, okay, so you can start asking, yeah, I mean.
So let me hop in here. I feel like a significant portion of this is talking about this concept of not letting the idea of perfection get in the way of progress, right? And I think that's a big part of confidence. If we create a conversation that impacts public confidence on the basis of, well, it has to be perfect or else it's all wrong, then to address the broader question, well, then we are making it worse, right? Because that's the goal. Maybe it's not a realistic concept to have perfection be the goal. We want to strive for it, but the lack of perfection should not be a deterrent to this concept of public confidence.
So let me just rephrase it a little.
60 seconds.
Acknowledging imperfections is important, and pretending that the imperfections are not there is not okay. Overclaiming is just not okay. I recognize things are never going to be perfect, but we should acknowledge the imperfections and not overclaim.
Perfect. So that's all we have time for. All of my panelists, myself, will be here the rest of the day. Please give them a round of applause. And we'll be ready for the next presentation. Thank you all for participating.